Billionaire's son throws black maid into the pool. Her response will shock you. It was a warm summer afternoon in Manhattan, and Tasha, a black maid, had spent years working for the wealthy Hayes family. Despite her tireless dedication, she was treated like an invisible part of the house. At a pool party that day, Ethan, the billionaire's son, decided to have some fun. With a smug grin, he shoved Tasha into the pool, laughing as she floundered in the water. But Tasha didn't lash out. Instead, she quietly climbed out, her face a mix of hurt and resignation. She didn't say a word, just walked away, the sounds of laughter fading behind her. It was just another reminder of how little she meant to them. Have you ever felt invisible, no matter how hard you tried? The rest of the day felt like a blur to Tasha. She quietly went home to her small apartment, removed her drenched clothes, and tried to settle her thoughts. Her mind kept circling back to the pool incident. It wasn't just the prank that hurt, but the weight of the years she had spent in the Hayes family's service, always invisible. Despite the long hours she worked to care for their home, she had never been treated as anything other than the maid. The pain wasn't new, it had built up over time. But that moment, when Ethan pushed her into the pool, brought it all to the surface. Her mother had been growing sicker for months. Every night, Tasha would sit by her side, doing her best to keep her comfortable, but the medical bills piled up faster than she could manage. Even after spending countless hours at work, she was barely keeping up with the costs of the treatments her mother desperately needed. It was a constant battle, one she fought silently, never burdening the family she worked for. While Tasha was trying to shake off the day's events, Ethan had begun to reflect. He had always treated Tasha as though she were nothing more than a fixture in their home. But after overhearing her quiet conversation with his mother that evening, he began to see her in a completely different light. He learned that her mother was critically ill and that Tasha had been shouldering the responsibility of caring for her while working tirelessly. The next morning, Tasha was preparing to leave for work, bracing herself for another exhausting day. But before she could step out the door, Ethan approached her with a new sense of humility in his eyes. He told her that he had spoken to his parents and that they would cover her mother's medical bills. Shocked, Tasha barely knew how to respond. Ethan wasn't finished, though. He invited her to a formal dinner that evening, asking her to attend as a guest, not as an employee. This unexpected kindness, coming from the young man who had humiliated her the day before, left Tasha speechless. For the first time, Tasha felt seen, not as a maid, but as a person worthy of respect. The evening of the dinner arrived, and Tasha found herself standing in front of her modest mirror, adjusting the simple dress she had chosen. It wasn't much, but it was the nicest thing she owned, and tonight, for the first time, she wouldn't be just the maid. As she stepped into the grand Hayes mansion, the difference in worldviews hit her like a wave. The opulence of the place made her feel out of place, even though she had cleaned every corner of it. The sparkling chandeliers, the marble floors, the perfectly manicured garden, it all felt so distant from her small apartment and her mother's sickbed. When Ethan greeted her at the door, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only a quiet respect. "I'm glad you could come," he said, leading her into the crowded dining room. The guests, all well-dressed and wealthy, didn't seem to notice her presence at first, but Ethan made sure to introduce her to everyone with a calm sincerity. For the first time in years, Tasha felt like she was truly being seen, not for her role, but for who she was. As the night went on, she found herself engaged in real conversations, not the polite, transactional interactions she had grown accustomed to. Ethan's family seemed to treat her differently too, no longer just the help. They asked about her life, about her mother, and even expressed genuine interest in her well-being. But despite the warmth, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider in this lavish world. The disparity between their lives was stark, and she felt a quiet tug in her heart, questioning whether she truly belonged. Halfway through the evening, as Tasha stood on the balcony looking out over the city lights, Ethan joined her. He stood beside her in silence for a moment before speaking. "I don't want you to think this is charity, Tasha. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you. I'm doing this because I've learned a lot about what it means to truly care about someone." His voice was soft, sincere. Tasha met his gaze and saw that something had changed in him, something deep. But as the night continued, A part of her still hesitated. She had always been independent, fiercely so. Was accepting this kindness, this gesture, a sign of weakness? Would she be forever indebted to Ethan and his family for something that should have been hers by right? She didn't have the answers, and the uncertainty lingered in her heart. The evening ended with a gentle, heartfelt goodbye, but as Tasha left the mansion, she couldn't shake the question. Had anything really changed, or was this just another moment in a life that would never truly be hers? The days after the dinner were a blur for Tasha. While she was grateful for Ethan's generosity, the nagging feeling of unease wouldn't leave her. She had always worked hard for everything she had, and while Ethan's offer to cover her mother's medical bills had been kind, a part of her resisted it. She didn't want to feel like she owed him, and she certainly didn't want to be seen as a charity case. Her pride, built over years of self-reliance, was something she couldn't just cast aside, no matter how much help she needed. The internal conflict was real, and every time she thought about accepting Ethan's offer fully, a knot formed in her stomach. She didn't want to appear weak. Yet, as her mother's condition worsened, the truth became clear. Tasha couldn't do it alone. The hospital bills were piling up, and her mother needed the best care she could afford. With a heavy heart, Tasha made the decision to swallow her pride and let Ethan's offer stand. But even then, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like giving up a piece of herself. One evening, as Tasha returned home from another grueling day at the Hayes household, she found herself standing at the door of her apartment, her hand resting on the doorknob. The familiar weight of the day's exhaustion settled onto her shoulders. But tonight, there was a phone call waiting for her, an unexpected call that would change everything. Ethan's mother, Mrs. Hayes, was on the line. "Tasha," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "Ethan and I have been talking, and we've decided to do more. We want to help you in a way that doesn't feel like charity. We're setting up a fund for you and your mother, but it's yours to manage. You'll have full control." The words stung at first. Full control? But then the relief washed over her. This wasn't charity. It wasn't a handout. It was a chance for Tasha to take care of her mother with dignity, to make decisions for her family without the burden of guilt or shame. It was as though, in one moment, Ethan and his family had understood everything Tasha had been too proud to admit to herself. As she hung up the phone, a sense of clarity settled over her. She wasn't just accepting help. She was accepting the opportunity to rise above the past and create a new future. It was a turning point. But even as things began to shift, there was still the lingering question: would Tasha truly find peace in this new chapter? Tasha stepped into her apartment, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. But the journey ahead was far from over. There were still challenges, still fears. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could face them, not alone, but with the support of people who had started to see her as something more than just a maid. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Tasha. She had always been a woman of action, managing everything in her life with efficiency and strength. But now, as she navigated the path of accepting help, she found herself facing new emotions: gratitude, vulnerability, and the unspoken fear of losing her own identity in the process. The medical bills that had once felt insurmountable now seemed manageable, with the fund that Ethan and his parents had set up for her. Tasha could finally focus on what truly mattered: being there for her mother. She spent her days by her bedside, taking care of her as best she could, while still maintaining her work at the Hayes household. Yet, in every quiet moment with her mother, Tasha couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. Ethan, who had once been distant and aloof, continued to visit her mother regularly. His visits were always brief but full of genuine concern. Every time he looked at Tasha, she saw the change in him. He no longer saw her as just the maid. There was something deeper in his eyes now, something that hinted at the shared understanding between them. Ethan had broken away from the world of privilege he had grown up in and had begun to truly grasp the struggles that so many others faced. But despite all the progress, Tasha couldn't shake the doubt that still lingered in her heart. Was this just a temporary kindness, a phase Ethan would eventually forget about? Would their relationship return to what it had been before, with her in the background, just another part of the household staff? Then, one fateful afternoon, when Tasha came home from work, there was a knock on her door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and when she opened it, she was surprised to find Ethan standing there, holding a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "I thought you might need this," he said, his voice steady but filled with meaning. Tasha took the package from him and opened it carefully. Inside, she found a simple leather-bound notebook, with a note tucked inside. The note read, "To help you write the next chapter of your life. With respect and care, Ethan." Tasha's heart swelled as she held the notebook in her hands. This wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of the respect and trust that had developed between them. She had never expected this, never expected to be seen as someone worth investing in, not just financially but emotionally as well. Ethan stood there, waiting for a response, and Tasha felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude. She didn't know where this new relationship would take them, but she knew that this was the beginning of something real. She had been given a chance to rise, not because of her circumstances, but because she had finally been seen for who she truly was. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling the weight of the words more than ever before. And in that moment, as the city lights twinkled outside her window, Tasha realized that despite everything, the hardships, the struggles, and the humbling moments, she was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the maid. She was a woman who had fought for her place in the world, and she was finally being recognized. But even as she felt the peace of this new chapter settling in, she knew the hardest part was still ahead. Would she truly be able to accept all that had been offered to her? Could she balance the pride she had spent years cultivating with the kindness that had been given to her? And most of all, would she ever truly believe that she deserved it? The answers were still unfolding, but one thing was certain: her story was no longer just about survival. It was about growth, connection, and the beautiful possibility of a new beginning. As the weeks passed, Tasha's life slowly transformed. With the medical bills taken care of and her mother receiving the treatment she needed, Tasha felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had spent years fighting on her own, but now, for the first time, she was learning to accept the kindness others offered without guilt. Ethan's visits became more frequent, and their conversations deepened. No longer the arrogant, entitled young man, Ethan had become someone Tasha could talk to, someone who understood her struggles. His gesture with the notebook had meant more to her than words could express. It symbolized a new beginning, not just for her, but for their relationship. Tasha no longer felt invisible. The bond she had with Ethan was built on something deeper than wealth. It was built on respect, empathy, and understanding. Though there were still moments of uncertainty, Tasha had come to realize that she was worthy of this kindness, and she no longer feared losing herself in it. As her mother's health improved, Tasha began to think about the future. She knew that her journey wasn't over, but she was no longer alone. With newfound strength and support, she was ready to face whatever came next. In the quiet of her apartment, Tasha held the notebook close to her heart. She had been given a chance to write her own story, and for the first time in her life, it was one she could be proud of. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales.